There is a pipe running beneath your kitchen floor right now that your great-grandfather installed without a permit, without a contractor, and without a single monthly bill attached to it. It worked for 40 years. Then someone convinced your family it was dangerous. Then someone sold them something to replace it. And every month since then, you have been paying for the replacement. I spent 2 years tracking down the original designs, the ones buried in county archives, agricultural bulletins, and the personal ledgers of families who never stopped using them. What I found was not primitive. It was not crude. It was engineered. Deliberately. Quietly. And then just as deliberately, it was made to disappear. Here are 25 methods your grandparents used every single day that still function in the house you are sitting in right now. This is not a survival channel. This is not about going off into the wilderness and starting over. This is about the house you already own, the utility bills you are already paying, and the systems that existed inside American, British, Canadian, and Australian homes before 1940 that answered every single one of those bills with a quiet, permanent zero. Every method I am going to show you is documented. Public record, agricultural bulletins, university extensions, historical society archives. Nothing here is invented. All of it was real. Most of it still is. By the end of this, you will understand why you never learned any of it in school, and you will understand exactly what to do about that. Number 1. The gravity-fed cold pantry. Before the refrigerator became standard equipment in the American home, builders positioned a specific room on the north-facing exterior wall of the house, below window level, with a stone or brick floor and a vent that opened to the outside near the ground. No insulation on the exterior wall. That was intentional. The earth on the other side of that wall sits at a near constant 52 degrees Fahrenheit year-round across most of the northern United States, the UK Midlands, and southern Canada. The stone floor conducted that temperature inward. The low vent pulled cool air in at floor level. A higher vent let warm air escape near the ceiling. Natural convection. No motor. No compressor. No electricity. The University of Minnesota Agricultural Extension published specifications for this exact design in 1931. A properly built cold pantry maintained food at between 38 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit, through summer and winter alike. You are thinking, you cannot do this in a modern home. You are wrong. Any exterior wall in your basement that faces north or northeast and sits below ground level is already doing half the work. Frame a closet against it. Leave the concrete bare. Add a 4-inch vent near the floor and another near the top of the door frame. You have just built a cold pantry that costs nothing to run for the rest of your life. Materials under $180. Timeline: 1 weekend. Number 2. Rainwater harvesting through a roof washer system. A single inch of rainfall on a 1,500 square foot roof produces approximately 900 gallons of water. Your grandparents knew this number by heart. Before municipal water systems expanded aggressively through rural communities in the post-war years, most farmhouses in rural England, the American Midwest, and rural Australia ran entirely on collected rainwater, filtered through a device called a roof washer, sometimes called a first flush diverter. The design is simple. The first rainfall of any storm, which carries dust, bird waste, and debris, is diverted away automatically using a sealed vertical pipe with a floating ball inside. Once that pipe fills, the ball seals it, and all subsequent water routes directly into the storage tank. What enters the tank is clean. A food-grade intermediate bulk container, the kind used to ship olive oil or fruit concentrate, holds 275 gallons and typically sells used for between $60 and $90. Connected to your existing downspout with a first flush diverter, you can build from $12 worth of PVC fittings and a rubber ball. Run the output through a basic sediment filter cartridge. That is your garden water, your toilet water, your laundry water. Completely free. Completely off the meter. Number 3. The Haybox Slow Cooker. During the First World War, the United States Food Administration published a pamphlet encouraging American households to cook using insulated boxes packed with hay, wool, or shredded newspaper. The method was simple. Bring your pot to a full rolling boil on the stove for 8 to 10 minutes. Nest it inside a wooden box lined with dense insulation. Close the lid. Leave it for 4 to 6 hours. The food finished cooking on its own, retained heat. Completely. Beans, stew, roasts, porridge, rice, all of it came out fully cooked. The government promoted this. Officially. Nationally. By 1923, those pamphlets had been pulled from circulation. The gas and electric range manufacturers had begun their advertising campaigns. A method the government had endorsed as patriotic and practical was reclassified, quietly, as old-fashioned. It was not old-fashioned. It was free. You can build one this afternoon. A wooden crate, 2 inches of wool insulation on every interior surface, a lid that fits snugly, total costs around $25. Every meal you finish in that box is a meal that costs you no gas, no electricity, and no compromise in quality. Number 4. The sand and charcoal water filter. Before chemical water treatment became standard municipal practice, rural homes across the American South, rural Canada, and the English countryside filtered their water through layered beds, of coarse gravel, fine sand, and charcoal made from hardwood. The design was not accidental. It was engineered through generations of observation. The 1908 edition of Cyclopedia of American Agriculture, Volume 2, describes the exact layering sequence. Gravel at the base for drainage, coarse sand above it, fine sand in the middle, activated charcoal near the top, and a final layer of fine sand at the surface. Water passed through all 5 layers and emerged clear and odorless from the bottom outlet. A study conducted by the Rural Water Association in 1997 tested reconstructed historical sand filters against modern ceramic filters and found that the layered sand and charcoal design removed over 92% of suspended solids and biological contaminants. You can build a working version of this in a large food-grade barrel for under $40. It is not a replacement for a modern whole house system if your water source is compromised, but for rainwater, for pond water, for emergency preparedness, it is a complete and functional solution your great-grandmother used without thinking twice. Number 5. Window positioning for passive cooling. In 1894, a builder named Elias Carpenter completed a farmhouse outside of Lexington, Kentucky, that had no mechanical ventilation of any kind. It stayed below 75 degrees Fahrenheit through the summer of 1896, which was one of the hottest summers on record in that region. He used 3 principles your current home almost certainly ignores. The first, windows on the south and west walls were kept small and positioned high, above head height, to allow hot air to escape upward while limiting direct solar heat gain during the hottest afternoon hours. The second, windows on the north and east walls were positioned low, near floor level, to draw cool morning air inward along the ground, where it naturally settled. The third, a single window on the roof, or in the highest gable of the home, acted as a thermal chimney, drawing the accumulated heat of the entire house upward and out continuously throughout the day. This system, documented in the 1916 USDA Bulletin on Farm Building Design, created a continuous passive airflow through the structure, with no moving parts whatsoever. You probably cannot reposition your existing windows, but you can approximate this effect. North and east windows opened at floor level. South and west windows cracked at the top only. Attic hatch opened to draw heat upward. Combined with blackout curtains on western exposures, this arrangement can reduce interior temperature by 8 to 12 degrees Fahrenheit on a hot day without touching a thermostat. Cost, 0. Number 6. The smokehouse and cold smoking method. Before the Wholesome Meat Act of 1967 tightened regulations around home curing, every serious farm household in the American South, rural Scotland, and the Canadian Maritime Provinces maintained a smokehouse. Not the steel, electric cabinet sold in hardware stores today. A real smokehouse was a small brick or heavy timber structure with a firebox dug into the ground 10 to 15 feet away, connected by a buried clay tile or a covered earthen trench. The smoke traveled along the trench, lost most of its heat, and entered the smokehouse cool and dense at the floor level. Cold smoking, below 90 degrees Fahrenheit, for days at a time. Hams hung in that environment for 3 weeks, after a proper dry cure emerged with a shelf life of 6 months without refrigeration. A study published in the Journal of Food Science in 2003 confirmed that properly cold-smoked and salt-cured pork maintains safe bacterial levels for up to 180 days at room temperature. The knowledge of how to do this correctly, at what temperature, with what salt ratios over what species of wood, has been quietly removed from agricultural extension materials that once distributed this information at county fairs for free. Hickory or applewood, smoke temperature between 70 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Dry cure ratio, 2 pounds of non-iodized salt, 1 pound of raw cane sugar, and 2 ounces of curing salt per 100 pounds of meat. Duration, 18 to 21 days for a whole ham. Write that down. It used to be printed on the back of seed packets. Number 7. The masonry thermal mass heater. The homes I found in rural Vermont and upstate New York that were built before 1880 shared one architectural feature that modern homes have completely abandoned. A central mass. Not a fireplace built into a wall. Not a wood stove in the corner. A freestanding brick or stone structure positioned at the geometric center of the living space. with flue channels that ran in long horizontal loops through the interior of the mass before exiting at the roof. The fire burned intensely for 60 to 90 minutes. Temperatures inside the combustion chamber exceeded 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, which meant nearly complete combustion. Almost no creosote. Almost no smoke. The heat was absorbed into the thermal mass of the stone, and then it radiated outward slowly and evenly for the next 16 to 20 hours. Research from the Maine Energy Office in 2009 found that a traditional masonry heater used approximately one-third the wood volume of a conventional wood stove to heat the same square footage and produced significantly lower particulate emissions. The full design is documented in the 1887 edition of the Builder's Guide to Rural Architecture. A skilled mason can build one in a week, in a new construction or a major renovation. The cost runs between $3,000 and $6,000. It will outlast the house itself. If that is beyond your current situation, a rocket mass heater, which uses the same thermal mass principle at a fraction of the cost, can be built from salvaged materials for under $400. Families in Montana and rural British Columbia heat through winters that drop to 30 below zero on this single appliance. Number 8. The thermosiphon solar water heater. In 1891, a man named Clarence Kemp filed a patent in Baltimore, Maryland, for a device he called the Climax Solar Water Heater. It was a black-painted metal tank inside a glass-covered wooden box, tilted toward the south at an angle matching the local latitude. No pump, no thermostat, no electricity. Hot water, being less dense than cold water, rises naturally. As the sun heated the water in the collector, it rose through a pipe into an insulated storage tank, positioned higher up. Cold water from the bottom of the storage tank flowed down to replace it. Continuous circulation, continuous heating, no moving parts. By 1920, tens of thousands of these systems were installed across Florida, California, and Arizona. In Pasadena alone, more than a third of residential homes had one. Then the natural gas industry arrived with municipal supply contracts, aggressive retail pricing, and advertising budgets no small manufacturer could match. By 1950, the solar water heater had been effectively erased from the American home. Auburn University tested a reconstructed thermosiphon system in 2014 and found that a 42-square-foot collector in central Alabama produced sufficient hot water for a family of 4 for 9 months of the year. In the UK, Australia, and Canada, performance varies by latitude, but even in northern climates, 6 to 7 months of full solar water heating is achievable. Build cost, approximately $350 to $500 in materials. Payback period, under 18 months at current energy prices. The design is in the public domain. It has been in the public domain since 1908, when Kemp's patent expired. Number 9. The root cellar ventilation system. This is not simply about digging a hole in the ground. The difference between a root cellar that keeps food for 9 months and one that rots everything inside it in 3 weeks comes down entirely to a ventilation principle that most modern guides get completely wrong. Your grandparents knew it instinctively. Cold air is heavier than warm air. It settles. Warm, moist air rises. A properly designed root cellar positions its intake vent near the floor on the north or shaded side. The exhaust vent sits near the ceiling on the opposite wall, or exits through the roof at the highest point. This creates a passive draft that pulls fresh, cool air in low, circulates it through the stored produce, and exhausts the warm ethylene-heavy air that accelerates spoilage near the top. The 1913 USDA Farmers Bulletin number 544 gives exact vent sizing calculations based on cellar volume. It is 34 pages long, written for a farmer with a 6th grade education, and it covers every variable you will encounter. A 10 by 12-foot hillside cellar, built to these specifications, will hold a temperature between 33 and 38 degrees Fahrenheit and a humidity level between 85 and 95% for 10 months of the year, without any mechanical assistance. Potatoes will keep 8 months. Carrots packed in damp sand will keep until April. Properly cured winter squash will keep until February. Apples, stored separately to manage ethylene gas, will keep until March. A family of 4 can store a full winter's worth of produce in this space and spend nothing on refrigeration from October through April. Number 10. Lye soap from wood ash. Every farm household in rural America, rural England, and the Australian bush made soap once a year from 2 things they already had in excess: animal fat and wood ash. The process has not changed since the 1700s. Hardwood ash, preferably from oak, hickory, or fruitwood, is packed into a barrel with a small hole at the bottom. Rainwater is poured slowly over the ash. The water leaches through, absorbing potassium hydroxide from the ash, and drips from the bottom as lye. Traditional test: strong enough lye floats a fresh egg. That lye, combined with rendered animal fat, at a ratio of roughly 1 pound of lye to 3 pounds of fat, produces soap through a chemical process called saponification. The mixture is cooked slowly, poured into molds, and cut after 48 hours. The result cleans clothing, skin, dishes, and floors. It is fully biodegradable. It contains no synthetic fragrance, no petrochemical surfactants, no plastic microbe beds. The FDA does not regulate homemade soap made for personal use. You can make it legally, use it freely, and give it to family members without any licensing requirement. The knowledge of correct lye concentration, correct fat preparation, and correct curing time was carried in handwritten recipe books, passed from grandmother to granddaughter for 200 years. Most of those books are gone now. The knowledge nearly went with them. The correct lye-to-fat ratio, the correct pouring temperature, and the correct curing duration are all documented in the 1919 edition of the Farmer's Wife magazine, archived in full at the Library of Congress. Number 11. The hand-dug cistern. There are cisterns beneath farmhouses in rural Pennsylvania, Virginia, and rural Ontario that have been collecting and storing water continuously since before the American Civil War. Some of them are still in use. A cistern is not a well. A well draws from groundwater. A cistern collects surface water, primarily rainwater from rooftops, and stores it in a sealed underground chamber. The construction is straightforward. A hole, roughly 10 to 14 feet deep and 8 feet in diameter, lined with a lime and sand mortar at a ratio of 1 part lime to 3 parts sharp sand, rendered smooth on the interior walls. A sealed cover at ground level. A first flush diverter on the inlet pipe. A hand pump at the draw point. Total storage, between 4,000 and 7,000 gallons depending on dimensions. That is enough water for a household of 4 to survive a 4-month drought with careful management. In 2007, a historian documenting rural water systems in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, found 34 functional cisterns still in active use on working farm properties, most of them built between 1880 and 1920. Water samples from 6 of them tested within acceptable limits for all standard contaminants under EPA guidelines. They had never been serviced. They had never broken down. They had never sent a bill. Number 12. The passive solar greenhouse attached to the south wall. Before grow lights. Before heated greenhouses. Before the global supply chain delivered strawberries to northern Canada in January. Farm families in cold climates extended their growing season using a structure so simple it barely qualifies as architecture. A south-facing lean-to structure attached directly to the exterior wall of the house. Glazed with glass or heavy-duty polycarbonate, with a stone or brick floor, and no supplemental heat source whatsoever. The south-facing glass collected solar energy during the day. The stone floor absorbed and stored it. The house wall behind it, still warm from interior heating, provided a secondary heat source overnight. Inside, even when outside temperatures dropped to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, the temperature rarely fell below 28 degrees. With the right cold hardy varieties, greens, root vegetables, and herbs grew through January and February in northern Vermont. The 1920 USDA Circular on Farm Garden Structures described this exact design in detail, recommending it for farm families in USDA hardiness zones 4 through 6 as a cost-free method of extending fresh vegetable production by 3 to 4 months. Materials for a basic 6 by 10 foot attached greenhouse, under $600. Growing season extension, 90 to 120 days. Monthly savings on produce, variable but consistent. Number 13. The earthen floor. This one will surprise you. Before poured concrete became the default for basement and outbuilding floors after World War II, most rural structures used earthen floors finished with a mixture of clay, sand, and linseed oil, applied in thin layers, each one dried before the next was added, and burnished smooth with a flat stone. A properly finished earthen floor is nearly as hard as concrete. It is dust-free. It does not crack from seasonal movement. It maintains a consistent surface temperature several degrees warmer than concrete in winter, because it has lower thermal conductivity. A family in rural Devon, England, documented in a 2015 survey by the Dartmoor Historic Buildings Group, was still living on an original earthen floor laid in 1923. In 90 years, it had received 2 roiling treatments. No cracks, no cold spots, no maintenance cost. The mixture, 70% subsoil clay, 30% sharp sand, linseed oil at 1 part oil to 4 parts mineral spirits for the finishing treatment. Application technique documented in the 1910 edition of Practical Cottage Building, available through the British Library Archive. Number 14. The wind-powered water pump. before rural electrification reached the American Great Plains in the 1930s and 1940s. Nearly every working farm in Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, and rural Manitoba ran its water supply from a windmill, not the ornamental decorative kind. A working mechanical windmill with a multi-blade rotor, a tailvane for automatic wind tracking, and a direct drive reciprocating pump that lifted water from depths of up to 200 feet. These systems were engineered. The Air Motor Company of Chicago began manufacturing them in 1888. By 1930, an estimated 6 million windmill-powered water pumps were operating across North America. In Australia, the Southern Cross windmill became so fundamental to outback farming that it still appears on the coat of arms of several regional councils. The Rural Electrification Administration, established in 1985, made it its explicit policy to retire these systems and replace them with electrically powered pumps. The utility rate base required volume. Windmills did not pay monthly fees. Most were scrapped. Some survived. On properties with consistent wind, a restored or newly installed mechanical windmill pump still outperforms an electric pump on cost over any 10-year window. Current manufacturers include Air Motor, which never stopped making them, and several Australian manufacturers who continued supplying the outback market throughout the 20th century. Number 15. The beeswax wood preservative. Before, petroleum-based wood sealers, exterior woodwork on farm buildings, fences, gates, and outbuildings was preserved with a mixture of beeswax, linseed oil, and pine resin. The formula: 2 parts raw linseed oil, 1 part beeswax by weight, 1 part pine resin. Heated together until fully combined, brushed onto bare wood while warm, and allowed to absorb over 24 hours. A fence post treated with this mixture in 1910 was documented in the 1978 Vermont Historical Agricultural Survey, as still standing, still sound, 68 years later. Modern pressure-treated lumber is effective. It also contains compounds that require careful handling and disposal. The beeswax and linseed mixture contains nothing that would concern an agricultural inspector, a child, or a garden. Cost per gallon of mixture, approximately $18 using locally sourced materials. Reapplication interval, every 5 to 7 years depending on exposure. The formula appears in the 1914 edition of Farm Structures, published by the American Society of Agricultural Engineers, in the public domain. Number 16. The cold process butter and cheese cave. In any region where limestone geology creates consistent underground temperatures, farm families build cheese aging and butter storage facilities directly into the hillside, not a root cellar. Specifically a cave, or a cave-like structure with constant airflow, constant humidity, and constant temperature. In the Ozarks, the Appalachians, rural Kentucky, and throughout the limestone belt of rural England, these structures maintained temperatures between 50 and 56 degrees Fahrenheit and humidity above 90% without any mechanical assistance. Those are the exact conditions required for aging hard cheese, a properly constructed kvadrated cheddar. Documented in a 1921 USDA dairy circular, required no refrigeration during its 6-month aging period. It emerged shelf-stable for an additional 3 months at room temperature. Today, artisan cheesemakers pay significant money to replicate these exact conditions, with mechanical cooling and humidity control. Your grandparents had it for free, built into the geology of the land they farmed. If you have a hillside on your property with limestone or dense clay subsoil, the construction technique is documented in the 1903 Wisconsin Agricultural Experiment Station Bulletin, archived through the National Agricultural Library. Number 17. The treadle-powered grain mill. Before electrification, every farm household that grew grain also milled it. Not at a commercial mill, at home. On a treadle-powered or hand-cranked stone mill, mounted to a workbench in the kitchen or the outbuilding. The design had not changed materially since the Roman period. 2 circular stones, the lower one fixed, the upper one rotating. Grain fed through the center. Flour emerged at the circumference. Coarseness adjusted by changing the gap between stones. Whole grain flour produced on a stone mill retains the germ and the bran. It is nutritionally complete, in a way that commercial white flour is not. It also has a shelf life of approximately 2 weeks at room temperature, before the natural oils in the germ begin to oxidize. That short shelf life is precisely why commercial milling removed the germ. Long shelf life serves the supply chain. It does not serve the person eating the bread. Working treadle grain mills are still manufactured. Diamond, a Danish manufacturer, has produced them continuously since 1924. Country Living, an American manufacturer based in Washington State, has made them since 1977. The knowledge of stone milling has never disappeared. It was simply made inconvenient. Number 18. The Spring House. If you have ever wondered why old farm properties in Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and rural Wales so consistently have a small stone outbuilding near a stream or at the base of a slope, this is why. Spring house was built directly over or immediately beside a cold water spring. The water was channeled through a shallow stone trough cut into the floor. The structure was built of thick stone or brick with a tightly fitted wooden door and no windows. Inside, year-round, the temperature held between 48 and 54 degrees Fahrenheit. The constant evaporation of the flowing water kept humidity near 100%. Those conditions kept fresh milk usable for 5 days. Butter kept for 3 weeks. Aged cheese kept for months. A woman named Margaret Sutherland documented in a 1978 oral history project conducted by the University of Virginia, used a spring house built by her father-in-law in 1901 as her primary food cold storage until 1969. She bought a refrigerator that year. She told the interviewer, because her grandchildren liked ice in their drinks in the summer. The spring house is still standing on that property. Number 19. The wattle and daub insulation technique. Before fiberglass bats, before spray foam, before rigid board insulation, walls in rural England, colonial America, and rural Australia were insulated with a mixture called daub, applied over a woven framework called wattle. The wattle was woven from flexible branches, typically hazel or willow, threaded between vertical structural members. The daub was a mixture of subsoil, clay, chopped straw or animal hair, and water. Worked to a consistency similar to thick plaster and pressed firmly into both faces of the wattle framework. When dried, the assembly created a wall section with a thermal resistance comparable to a modern tinge rigid foam board. A 2012 study by the University of Bath's Department of Architecture and Civil Engineering tested original wattle and daub wall sections removed from a 1780s English farmhouse during renovation, and found thermal performance within 15% of modern mineral wool insulation of equivalent thickness. The material cost, essentially zero for anyone with access to clay subsoil and a stand of willow. The skill required, 1 weekend of practice. Number 20. The kerosene absorption refrigerator. This is the one that stops most people completely. A refrigerator that runs on kerosene, no electricity, no compressor, no moving parts at all. The absorption refrigeration cycle was patented in 1858 by Ferdinand Kera in France. It works on the principle that certain refrigerant gases, when absorbed into a liquid solution, release heat. And when that solution is heated and the gas is driven off again, cooling occurs. By 1920, absorption refrigerators, running on kerosene, natural gas, or propane, were commercially manufactured and sold across the United States, the UK, and Australia. Electrolux built them. Servile built them. They were reliable, quiet, and required no power connection whatsoever. When the Rural Electrification Administration reached rural communities in the 1940s, these refrigerators were aggressively marketed against, replaced by compressor models that required a monthly electricity bill. They never stopped being manufactured for the Amish market. Today, companies in Pennsylvania and Indiana still produce propane and kerosene absorption refrigerators for off-grid households. They are legal. They are available. They are fully functional. The only reason you did not already know that is because no one who profits from your electricity bill told you. Number 21. The copyist woodlot. Before the chainsaw, before the lumberyard, before treated pine became the default fencing and structural material, farm families managed their woodlots using a technique called coppicing. Certain tree species, including hazel, willow, ash, oak, and chestnut, when cut near the ground, regrow from the root system and produce multiple straight shoots rather than a single trunk. A coppiced hazel stool, managed correctly, produces usable poles every 7 years, indefinitely. The same root system can produce poles continuously for hundreds of years. Some coppiced stools in rural England have documented histories of continuous management stretching back to the medieval period. From those poles came fence posts, tool handles, basket weaving material, thatching spars, and firewood. A 1-acre coppiced woodlot, managed in rotation, meaning different sections cut in different years, produced a continuous annual yield of usable wood without ever replanting. The 1905 USDA Forestry Bulletin on Farm Woodlot Management described this technique in detail and recommended it for every farm property in the eastern United States, with sufficient land. That bulletin has not been in active circulation since 1960. Number 22. The passive rainwater irrigation system. Before drip irrigation systems, before soaker hoses, before electrically timed sprinkler systems, farm gardens in dry climates were irrigated using a passive system called a An olla is an unglazed clay pot, sealed at the top except for a small opening, buried in the soil beside plant roots, with only the neck exposed above ground. Water poured into the neck, seeps slowly through the porous clay walls directly into the root zone of surrounding plants. No evaporation from the surface. No runoff. The clay walls respond to soil moisture content. When the surrounding soil is dry, osmotic pressure draws water outward. When the soil is saturated, the flow slows automatically. A study published in the journal Agricultural Water Management in 2007 found that Ola irrigation reduced water consumption by up to 70%, compared to surface irrigation while maintaining equivalent or superior crop yields. The technique is over 2,000 years old. It was in common use in the American Southwest among both indigenous communities and Spanish settlers until the early 20th century. It was documented by USDA field agents in New Mexico in 1906. And Ola costs under $8 in materials if you make it yourself. A single pot irrigates a 4x4 garden bed for up to 4 days between fillings. Number 23. The barter, ledger, and skill exchange system. This is not romantic. This is economics. Before the cash economy fully penetrated rural communities in the early 20th century, most of what a farm family needed, that it could not produce itself, was obtained through direct exchange with neighbors. Not informal exchange. Documented exchange. Ledgered exchange. Every serious farm household kept a barter ledger, a written record of what was given and what was received, balanced across seasons and years. One neighbor had a dairy surplus in spring. Another had extra cordwood in autumn. A third had a draft horse available in planting season. The ledger tracked it all. This was not charity. This was not barter in the loose sense. This was a parallel economy that operated alongside the cash economy and provided genuine insulation against it. When grain prices collapsed in the 1920s, farm families with active barter networks weathered the collapse in ways that their cash-dependent neighbors did not. The skill is keeping the ledger, writing it down, making it formal, making it something that can be referred to, honored, and passed on. A handwritten ledger costs less than $5. The network it documents is worth more than any single utility bill you will ever pay. Number 24. The raised bed permanent garden system. Before annual tilling became standard agricultural practice in the 20th century, kitchen gardens in rural England, New England, and rural Quebec were built as permanent raised beds, established once, amended annually with compost, and never turned over. The French intensive method, documented in detail by Marquette gardeners in the Paris region in the 1880s, and brought to the United States by agricultural reformers in the early 1900s, produced yields per square foot that modern conventional agriculture has never matched. Elliot Coleman, writing in 1995 based on research into those original Parisian market gardens, documented yields of up to 4 times the national average per square foot of growing space, using no synthetic inputs whatsoever. The key was soil structure. Permanent raised beds, never walked on, developed a deep, loose, biologically active soil profile that annual tillage destroys every spring and must rebuild from scratch. A permanent raised bed system, properly established in its first year, improves every subsequent year without additional major labor. By year 5, the soil structure is By year 10, it outperforms annually tilled ground in every measurable category. Cost of establishment, soil amendments, and lumber for bed borders, typically under $200 for a family garden of 400 square feet. Long-term input cost, the time it takes to carry compost. Number 25, the handwritten knowledge ledger. And here is the last one, the simplest, the most subversive. Everything I have described in this video exists in written records, USDA bulletins, university extension documents, historical society archives, personal farm diaries. But those records are scattered. They are difficult to find, and they are written in the language of their era, which means they require interpretation to apply to a modern household. Your grandparents did not have scattered records. They had a book, a handwritten book, kept in the kitchen or the workshop, that contained the specific formulas, measurements, timing, and techniques that worked on their specific land, in their specific climate, for their specific household. How much salt per pound of pork? Which variety of apples stored longest in the cellar? What ratio of clay to sand produced the best earthen floor for their particular subsoil? The exact angle of the thermosiphon collector for their latitude. This book was not written once. It was added to over decades. It was corrected when something did not work. It was annotated when something worked better than expected. It was passed from parent to child. Most of those books are gone. They were thrown away in estate sales, mistaken for old receipts and grocery lists. The knowledge they contained did not disappear because it was wrong. It disappeared because the people who held it stopped writing it down. Start a ledger tonight. Write down what you have learned from this video. Write down what you try and what results you get. Write down what works for your house, your land, your climate. Because in 50 years, someone will find that ledger in a drawer, and what is written in it, in your handwriting, might be exactly what they needed. That is not theories, not nostalgia, documented methods, tested across generations, that still function in the house you already own. You do not have to implement all of them. Pick one. The rainwater collector on your downspout, the cold closet in the northeast corner of your basement, the haybox cooker on your kitchen counter this weekend. Start where you are, with what you have. If you want to go deeper, the next video covers something I found in a 1903 agricultural survey of rural Scotland. A method for keeping a house warm through winter using only the angle of the roof and the position of 2 interior walls. No fuel, no electricity, just geometry and the movement of heat. If this one was worth your time, subscribe. Not for the algorithm, because the next one is going to be worth your time as well. I will see you there.